Hello.
Hello, Eamonn.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm all right.
Yes.
Yeah.
You look very cosy in your chair, actually.
I
nice.
do.
Yeah.
I feel like the Paul Whitehouse character, who got pissed. I was terribly
Oh, was it
wrong.
me in a changing room at 4 a.m. That one. Yes.
I feel like him.
Nice. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And Eamonn, so let's just get stuck right into the rub of it. I feel AI is being bandied around in very ill-defined ways at the moment, particularly in the music industry.
Yeah.
I suppose the current real-world example is Now and Then, which was the Beatles' recent release.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you could talk a bit about that and what you think its significance was, and maybe how is AI being used? What does that mean for the music industry with that specific example?
Okay, well, we can get into kind of more of the intricate debates around that as we go along, but the Beatles example is using AI as a production tool, not kind of creating something out of the ether. So with the Now and Then track, it was based on a John Lennon demo from, I think, 77. Him at home playing the piano, singing along. And the three surviving Beatles in the 90s tried to, at the same time as they were doing Real Love and Free as a Bird, make a new Beatles song from that. But the problem was that they couldn't separate the piano from Lennon's vocals, or this is the argument that they're kind of putting out, although there is a quote from George Harrison saying that the song was shit. And they've Stalinistically rewritten that to say he thought the audio was very bad, not the song. So it was technology developed by Peter Jackson for the Get Back documentary, where they were able to isolate John Lennon's vocals from the piano. So they basically got a clean vocal, which means that the music's much more flexible, you can do a lot more things with it, and so you can complete the song. So that's why it's come out. So it's really, it's kind of just a fancier version of production. That's all that is. So it's not adding any words to John Lennon's voice, it's not adding new melodies or anything like that. It's basically in cleaning up the audio.
Okay, so it's a better tool, not necessarily a qualitative change in
No. Yeah, it's just like it's basically like a fancy version of GarageBand or something like that.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, a lot more expensive than GarageBand.
Yeah. Okay, so on one hand we've got that, and on the other hand, kind of serendipitously for our discussion, just 2 days ago, Edith Piaf's estate announced that there was going to be a biopic created in partnership with Warner Brothers, I think.
Yes, so Warner owned most of her catalogue.
Yeah.
So they, with the full involvement of the state, what they've done, and this is more related to something called generative AI, which is basically you take existing recordings or existing speech, and you see that in technology, like you've probably seen lots of examples of deep fake. So there's that famous Mark Zuckerberg video of him, and it's not him, and it's not him talking, but the AI has been trained on his voice, so it can recreate his voice and his intonations and so forth. So what they've done, the Edith Piaf estate has opened up loads of audio recordings of her, and they've trained they've used her source voice to have her effectively narrate her own documentary, even though she's been dead for a long, long time. So that's that is literally putting words in a dead person's mouth. It's obviously talking about her career, so it's got to be factual, but there's something quite weird about that. I think. Something quite unnerving, like the estate and Warner said, "Oh, this is amazing. This is what you would have wanted," like as if she could kind of determine that. But it's very much being presented as this is something that is approved. This is official, which raises huge kind of ethical, moral arguments.
Yeah, one of the things I found quite interesting or jarring about the press release that Warner Brothers put out is they almost seem to imply that the excitement about it was that Edith Piaf was responding to a contemporary culture. She was like, it's a chance for Edith to resonate currently and respond to 2023, which is a very spooky, jarring thing to suggest. I mean, it does sound like resurrection.
She wasn't necessarily known for her technological utopianism at the time. She wasn't like a cutting edge sonic pioneer. She was just a very good singer. So it's interesting how they're positioning that, because at the same time within the music industry, there's huge fears about AI. AI was seen as this terrible, terrible thing, because what it's going to do is it's going to replace pop stars. It's going to recreate songs in the style of, and it will get rid of pop stars, and it will get rid of labels, and just some kid in their bedroom can recreate Elvis or whoever else. And they were terrified of the copyright issues, because obviously the music industry is predicated on owning, controlling, and making money from copyright. So if you can do that, if someone can do that with a bit of software, if they can go into ChatGPT or something like that and write lyrics in the style of Leonard Cohen or whoever else, then what does that mean? Who owns that? And particularly this issue of training on existing songs, because does that then kind of become a form of sampling? So if you run through all the Beatles hits of the past and then say, create a song in the style of the Beatles, is that sampling, or is that the same as someone who grew up listening to the Beatles and knowing the songs inside out, and then writing a song inspired by that? So at what point does creativity create new intellectual property? And obviously the music industry doesn't want anyone to create intellectual property outside of their domain and their control.
Yeah, and I suppose at what state is that intellectual property actually a creative response, or just something drawing on data? But Dolly Parton seems to be an interesting example in this, right? Because she's done something, she's used AI, but in a way that's kind of married it with her own...
She hasn't used AI specifically, but this is something that AI can kind of bring to fruition. So Dolly Parton is an incredibly astute business person, and so what she's been doing for years is recording a cappella versions of songs. So these are all stored away, because she knows that when she dies that there will be this for an estate, you have to kind of keep the artist in the public domain or public discourse, and you need new material. So that's either studio outtakes, or now the technology's there, something like Now and Then. But she's done this purposely. So she's recorded tracks a cappella that can be contorted to any genre. So she could do it as a country song, she could do it as an EDM song, she could do it as a jazz song or whatever. So, and it's all done with her complete approval, and she's very much behind this. So all these studio recordings of her voice, and then just go, add your own instrumentation, and then there's just hundreds and hundreds of Dolly Parton songs that could come out in the future, and that could be duets or whatever else. So that's an interesting artist who is aware of the longevity of their reputation, and understanding that they have to put things in motion to ensure that that machine keeps ticking over, to ensure that there is this flow of potential new material.
So just great business foresight from Dolly, as ever.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting, creative thing, where she goes, here's the base of the song, and then just go and do whatever you want with it. So it kind of becomes a co-write in a way.
On that question, I mean, just to kind of maybe be a bit crass about it, because a lot of the debate around AI is about replacement of creative careers. Yeah. Is there a form of, I mean, from the big estates that are already established, you know, Piaf, Elvis, Dolly Parton, there's obviously a legal framework that can take ownership over that intellectual property and then harness it. Is there a broader, like, existential threat to the creative process? You know, in film, for example, writers have been on strike because there's fear of that.
Absolutely.
That so how serious is that on just outside of just the main artists on a kind of broader level?
Well, the music industry is now at a point where they're going, a couple of years ago, they went, AI is terrible, it's an existential threat, it is disgusting, and we need to stand by. And now they're at the stage where we're kind of going, AI is all right if we do it, and we're in control of it, but if you do it, no, you can't do it. So they're at that, we're at this kind of transition stage. It's almost like the stages of grief, like kind of denial, negotiation, and so forth. So they're at the stage where they're trying to put some kind of legal frameworks in place, because the problem with the music industry is that technology moves at a certain speed, and the music industry moves at a slower speed, and then the music industry lawyers move at an even slower speed, but they're holding everything back. So, and the problem is with something like this, it's something that's so new, no one wants to set a really bad legal precedent. They don't want to write down and say, this is what we need to do with this, because it could evolve into something else, and they go, shit, we didn't see that coming, and we shot ourselves in the foot. So there's a degree of containment going on, and it's kind of driven by paranoia, which is, I guess, the music industry's default setting on lots of things that happen outside of its own kind of purview. It's like, if you look at formats historically that were introduced to the music industry, so vinyl, cassette, CD, they were all done in consultation with the record industry. And then you had something like MP3 in the 1990s, and that was developed outside of the music industry, and that's when all hell broke loose, because it was suddenly a format and a delivery process they didn't control. Music industry was predicated on a certain type of control, almost a total control. And now things like AI suggest that that control is very conditional, and they're very, very scared about what that can and can't mean in the future.
And like small changes in music technology, like, you know, the synth, can really change musical movements. Yeah. This kind of slightly dramatic, almost, that seems, you know, like a much more dramatic change than the synth.
Yeah.
How do you think it can actually change the genres of music that we might end up listening to? Are we standing on the precipice of a new AI dance craze? That sounded like my granddad trying to talk about TikTok, but you know what I mean.
TikTok. Yeah. Well, the music industry and musicians have historically, some of them have been opposed to technological developments. Like the Musicians Union in the 70s tried to have synthesizers banned because it was putting musicians out of work. You go back even further, live musicians who played on radio were against radio and recorded music because they felt that's going to put people out of business. And the art form morphs and adapts to the technology. So, and also you have to understand that the consumer's a huge big part of that. If what you're putting out is absolutely terrible and doesn't connect on a human level with people the way that the best music does, it's not going to go anywhere. It becomes like an academic exercise in a way to go, I could create something that's like Elvis, but people prefer Elvis because there's something human in his voice and his delivery, and there's the celebrity of Elvis, and all these other things. There's a lot more moving parts than just the song. And the way it's performed, the way it's sold, the context around the artist. So I kind of remain optimistic that, yeah, there will be lots of things. You can see, if you go online, there's like AI versions of Johnny Cash singing Barbie Girl and things like that. And you kind of think that's quite funny, but it's not going to replace, I don't know, Ring of Fire or something like that. So I think the consumer, I kind of believe in consumer sovereignty, that all of this stuff, all of the terrible stuff will die a terrible death, mostly in ignorance because people don't like it. I think people need that human element of creativity and that human element, that human moment of connection that is probably as an art form at its most intense in popular music.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so just listening to that, just very briefly, and then we'll move to our audience questions. Like any technological innovation, is there a danger then that it just becomes, as a kind of theme running through the day, it ends up just emboldening a rich few who own the estates of previous artists? Is there a way in which this AI change in technology can be democratized and actually affect change on a grassroots level? It's, the way that you're talking about it sounds like a way to bring, previous artists, more powerful voices who've already had previous success, rather.
Yeah, I think the idea, while it's nice to think that technology has this democratizing power, it's like that Marxist argument about every revolution sows the seeds of its own destruction, and everything becomes neutralized and absorbed into the mainstream, and that goes from rock and roll itself or jazz that kind of was seen as this kind of moral threat to the very fabric of Western society or whatever, and then it just got absorbed into stuff. And I think this idea of technology, the idea that you had this debate in the early 2000s, like MySpace, it's going to get rid of record labels. It didn't, because these are huge capitalist enterprises that neutralize all of these threats. And that's always been the history of every industry. So you could apply that to any industry, from soft drinks to cars to music. There's so much money and there's so much vested interest that a lot of these developments from the outside either get neutralized or they get absorbed, and they kind of become castrated to be made palatable, and that's just the way it's kind of welcome to capitalism, that capitalism always seems to win.
Welcome to capitalism, bitches. Here we go. Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Eamonn. That was brilliant. Round of applause for Eamonn. Thank you.
Thank you.